Let's do this thing. I really don't need this. Welcome. This is our inaugural conference panel for the BIPP Public Policy. I don't know how I got here, the glorified timekeeper. I'm Jake Powell. Emma Banks is going to kick us off, followed by June, Valerie, and Derek. I'm being maybe too informal, but it's very on brand for me. Yeah? Yeah, I always have a baseball cap on. Come on, please. I'm balding, you know what I mean? I'm truly fooling people here. All right, so I'll give them warnings. Emma, take it away, please.
Okay, well, it's exciting to kick the panel off and start out the conference. So if you're into this topic, I am giving a university colloquium on Tuesday, so you can hear more from a more kind of nuanced academic perspective. But so far, 2025 has been an absolutely deadly year in Colombia. In January, a wave of violence broke out in the Catatumbo region, which lies on the Venezuelan border, where fighters from the National Liberation Army, which is the largest guerrilla group that still has not signed a peace deal, killed 80 people in one weekend, resulting in tens of thousands of people fleeing that region. In early June, conservative candidate for president Miguel Uribe ended up in critical condition and later died after a hitman shot him during a campaign event. Colombia, though, is actually in its post-conflict era. So observers consider the conflict to have started in 1964, which is when the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, so the largest and most notorious guerrilla group, formed, and then to have ended in 2016 when they disbanded. And the 2016 peace accord was a great success in many ways. It was a major achievement to have the FARC demobilized. But nonetheless, right, the implementation of the peace accords has been incomplete, particularly because of, well, in part at least because Ivan Duque, he became president in 2018, basically refused to implement them, right? He wanted to punish the FARC instead. And at the same time, right, even the FARC that did demobilize left this incredible power vacuum that other groups have quickly filled. And now the current president, Gustavo Petro, has promised an approach called total peace, right, which involves both negotiating with those remaining armed groups, but also this other side of creating social guarantees for peace and stability. Yet both of these goals have had a lot of setbacks. Earlier this year, I actually canceled a fieldwork trip to where I work, which you can see is the La Guajira region, because violence was so bad. And I've worked there since 2013, and this is the only time I've ever had to do that. It has become a hotbed for these new armed groups that are seeking to control the flow of drugs and contraband across the Venezuelan border. And you can see it has a very long border with Venezuela, as well as a very uncontrolled coastline, this area. They also, right, in this area are seeking to provide security to mining companies. So there's a blurred line, right, between illegal and legal security practices. They extort mining royalties, and they recruit a lot of vulnerable youth in this region into their ranks. Regions like this in La Guajira are really key for understanding the failures of total peace. Well, much of the existing policy analysis has rightly focused on the failure to negotiate with these multiple armed groups that have filled that power vacuum. I want to focus on the other aspect here of total peace, which is why the guarantees for human security, which are outlined in Article 2 and 6 of the Total Peace Law, haven't come to fruition. So I'm interested, right, why is violence surging in these areas? And I argue that it's really because of extractive development projects like mining, which dominate the economy in these regions and rely on and create violent structures which undermine human security, create a massive incentives for illegal armed groups, and also perpetuate social and environmental crises. And so until there are actually real economic alternatives in these regions, violence will continue. And you can see, right, this is Article 6, which I pulled from the law of the Total Peace Law, which went into effect in 2022. And you can see, right, it's explicitly saying, like, we need a new form of development that has better policies, programs, and projects to comply with peace agreements. And it talks about equitable social development, equitable economic development, protection of nature, integration of the regions. And this, I think, is what, right, is really in the way right now of achieving lasting peace in Colombia. And until this is actually solved, it's very unlikely there will be lasting peace. And to understand this, I actually want to turn to a specific community, but I also want to turn to what might seem like an unlikely source of inspiration, which are birds. Nuevo Espinal is an indigenous community in La Guajira where I have done field work. During my most recent visit there, I was with my friend Alvaro Ipuana, who leads the community and who's shown me all the great progress that's happened in his community, new roads, new agricultural projects. And these are things that they got because they are victims of the armed conflict. I asked him how the security situation is doing, and he said things are getting better, but the whole time we were there, we were with his armed bodyguard. He can't sleep in his own community because he is, as a social leader, as a movement leader, and as a legal representative, is very likely to be assassinated. So this place, right, Nuevo Espinal, which is really beautiful in a lot of ways, also bears a lot of scars. It's a small YU indigenous community that's already suffered 2 waves of displacement. One, because of mining. It was relocated into this territory because a mining company, which is now called Cerrejón, owned by Glencore, seized their territory and forced them out in 1993. And then once they were relocated into that area, they found themselves in the midst of essentially a turf war between the FARC and between the AUC, which is the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, which is the largest paramilitary group. And they have long been kind of clashing for control there between Venezuela, for the smuggling route between Venezuela and Colombia. Between 1997 and 2013, there were multiple assassinations of the community, and then half of the families fled, returning eventually in 2018 with new guarantees as part of the peace process. And this larger process, there's been victims' reparations and land restitution. Yet, right, they still face violence from these new armed groups, but also from now 2 different mining companies that are vying for control of their territory. During my last visit, I spoke with Ignacio Ipana, who's one of Alvaro's uncles, and he's an elder in this community and has really witnessed a lot of transformation, also because he very much remembers what it was like before mining existed and before these armed actors existed. We talked a lot, and one of the things he kept saying, despite, yes, they've been displaced by violence, but that who's never actually taken accountability for the original displacement is the mining company in the first place, and the fact that where they've been relocated, they're still facing incredible environmental contamination. And for him, as a YU person, right, the territory where he lives is a collection of human and non-human beings. So this is a quote, and I want to just read the first part, but he says, the earth is a mother, the birds are beings, they warn us of what is going to happen. These are our customs and traditions. When they arrive, they make noise. They are singing, they are gathered there. And so a mountain, a territory without the fauna, it is not a territory. When there is an absence of communication, that means many things are gone because the birds communicate from far away. And he continues, right, to explain this, right? This comes from his ancestral knowledge. The birds connect him to his ancestors. In fact, they consider birds to be mediators as well for peace in their community. And also, right, connects him very profoundly to the landscape. And this is something when I was revising this interview earlier this year that really struck me, right? He actually brought up birds many, many times. You might be saying, Emma, why are you talking about birds at a policy conference? Well, it's because people like Don Ignacio have probably the best insights possible into Colombia's most pressing policy concern, which is perpetual violence. New waves of violence are unfolding in his community, Nuevo Espinal, in frontier regions like Guajira, and really all over in these extractive regions in Colombia. And I think that listening to the birds the way Don Ignacio does can answer why and provide a solution. So yes, the 2016 peace deal in Colombia was a major achievement, and it was a result of a long, drawn-out negotiation under the Manuel Santos administration. And it really did restore a lot of, I think, national confidence in peace. And yes, it is also, the fact that in 2018, when right-wing President Ivan Duque came to power, he basically had opposed the peace deal. He had run on opposing the peace deal and refused to implement much of it, right? Particularly things like land reform policies and these loftier goals. But the FARC was only one of many actors involved in Colombia's protracted conflict in the first place. So it should really not be that surprising that their demobilizing didn't solve the conflict. Right-wing paramilitaries that demobilized in 2006 under the Alvaro Uribe administration really demobilized in name only. They jailed leaders and they kept the paramilitary apparatus intact. Why? Because it's convenient for corporations who want to grab land, it's convenient for private security, and it is convenient for the military who doesn't want to patrol in dangerous areas where they believe there are guerrilla fighters, and they use the paramilitary to kill them. So when you keep that intact and it's enforced not just by the government, but by a lot of private capital, you get new paramilitary groups, and that is who is driving a lot of this violence. But okay, let's go then back to the birds. Birds warn us, right, of environmental catastrophe because they're sensitive to change, right? We think of the phrase canary in the coal mine. And in La Guajira, the expansion of both coal and copper mining is spelling trouble for these bird species. This is the most iconic bird, which is called, they call it the Guajira cardinal or the vermilion cardinal, and it has a very narrow range, you can see, right? It's basically in La Guajira and then parts of neighboring Venezuela. And they rely on this very fragile, dry, tropical forest ecosystem, which if it disappears with deforestation, the loss of water tables, and climate change, this bird species is gone. And we'll know they're here, right? When I go to Nueva Espinal, you hear it has this very melodic whistle, right? That's very, you always hear it when you're there. And, when you stop, as he says, like when you can't hear the birds, something is wrong, right? Why do I say this? Well, on one side of this community that, mind you, has been displaced once. Okay, this is their second location. Then they've been displaced out of here and have tried to move back. On one side of the community, this is the coal mine and its tailings pit. So despite having relocated to a place to get away from the coal mine, it's encroaching on them yet again. On the other side, this is the Parija mountain range, and this is where there's test pits going in for copper mining. So this community is literally, and this is the case of like most of the communities I work for, are being now enclosed by another mine. This coal mine, or this copper mine, Max Resource Corps, a Canadian startup, is already partnering with paramilitary organizations and has already hired them for private security. And so, this is the thing, like, we are holding, yes, we should hold the armed actors accountable in Colombia, but we're not holding corporate interests and the continued displacement and violence done onto people by corporations. Corporate expansion in Colombia has historically benefited from the armed conflict. If you look at the numbers when foreign direct investment explodes in Colombia, it's in the middle and the most violent time in Colombia. The displacement of local people makes land easier to grab. Massacres, assassinations, and terror campaigns have crushed resistance to projects like this. Colombia is the deadliest place in the world to be an environmental activist. These various armed groups that are circulating on territory also benefit from the presence of corporations because it creates opportunities to provide security. It creates opportunities to funnel royalties and, basically be involved in like mass municipal and regional level corruption. And so I agree with analysts, right, that the plan to negotiate and disarm these groups has failed under total peace. But for me, the bigger picture failure of total peace is that there's been no guarantees and no attempt to actually regulate this kind of very violent corporate expansion to protect fragile environments and to shore up land rights for rural people. And those are all promises made in total peace and also all causes of the ongoing conflict. So it's really imperative, right, to reveal and contest the ways in which corporations have engaged in war profiteering in Colombia and how they continue to fuel violent economies. So what is the solution? I turn back here to Ignacio Ipona, right, who talks about the desire to keep being part of the land, right, having policies to protect indigenous territories so that they remain there. And he calls this out correctly that, yeah, they've had policies, but Congress says it no longer exists. Why, right? Because they want to rebuild the reputation of Colombia through showing that it can be an economic giant in things like mining. And what he says, it turns out there is no improvement. Those who are there with the companies improve, but the people who live where the mines exist suffer more. So, if we think about the cardinals, right, and how they're warning, right, the expansion of these new and old mining projects and these new armed actors, and, we know when they stop singing, that also means that people in Nueva Espinal are probably very much in danger as well. And, it may seem idealistic to say we need to take this into account, but Total Peace right now only honors nature in his documentation, but there's been no real action to try to block corporate expansion, particularly in environmentally vulnerable areas, or to return land to displaced people. So there has to be real economic alternatives that honor the wishes of indigenous, peasant, and Afro-descendant communities who seek development that honors and protects the land and the birds. And while that might seem, out of the realm of possibility, I think it's the only way to actually guarantee lasting peace, stability, and well-being for people in nature.
Emma, thanks. With a minute to spare, keep the change, people. Okay, June is up next. June's a new faculty member, so it's very exciting to get to see the work. Happy to have you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. Yeah, not to steal the Institute's thunder, but it's also my inaugural semester at Bucknell, so it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to keep my own timer, too, because I am bad at that. So hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking to you about some issues of access of pharmacy and prescription medication. This is some joint work by a bunch of people. Myself, who I'm here at Bucknell in the math department. This is kind of a math talk. Do not be too scared. And by a bunch of people loosely affiliated with the QSIDE Institute, which is the Institute for Quantitative Study of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. So a bunch of nameless collaborators up there. Okay, so in our project, we study prescription refusals. This is when a pharmacist denies a medication to a patient who has some kind of prescription from a doctor or another professional may prescribe a medication. So there's a pharmacist who's doing the denying. There's a patient that's affected by that, and there's also a prescription from a doctor. This is an issue of access to healthcare, which is very important when thinking about equity in healthcare. There are many barriers to healthcare access that have been studied before by lots of people. There are some examples up in this slide. There is not much known about what barriers exist to accessing medication once a medication is prescribed. There's much more work on understanding what are barriers for someone to even get a doctor's appointment and all of the costs and time that goes into that. We're specifically interested in assessing the impact of accessing medication for people who do have a prescription already. And the motivation to this is that in a bunch of places, people are getting medications refused, or pharmacists are refusing to fill some prescriptions. Here are some examples that made the news, a few articles, spanning some states, spanning some time. And as you may notice, all those examples include contraceptive, emergency or not. That's not a coincidence, and we'll talk more later about this. Recently, there's also increasing political attention and contention on trans rights. There's also been reported cases of pharmacists refusing to fulfill medication related to gender care. And so there's a complex policy landscape, but here's where I put my policy hat on and try to not be a mathematician for one slide. And so all of the cases that we've looked at so far are cases in which a pharmacist appeals to their morality or religion and decide that, assess that filling a prescription will be against their values. So a pharmacist, so there's, okay, what I want to say here is that there's a lot of overlying policy and intersecting laws. At a federal level, a pharmacist may appeal to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, signed by Bill Clinton. So they may say, well, this goes against my morality and my religious obligation. I will not fulfill a prescription for something related to birth control or abortion. At the same time, these are all things that have to do with gender or sex discrimination, and there are some protections for that at a federal level. Now, I say kind of because when we started working on this, Title IX was understood to also cover things to do for related to queer rights and specifically gender discrimination. That is kind of being scraped by the minute. So in fact, that's been walked. Biden era guardrails on this have been walked back by both federal government administration action, but also judicial action. There's also some section of the Affordable Care Act that sort of enshrines some protections against discrimination for patients. And these apply if a facility is also getting some federal funding. At the state level, things are more complicated because they change all over the place. But some states have some conscientious objection clauses, which essentially mean that in this case, a pharmacist or someone in a position of authority may refuse to fulfill their duty of providing a service to some population if that is against their moral and religious beliefs. Some of these also have protections for patients. And so that's what I'm going to say. Another second slide that's about policy and now math. There's a quick summary of some of these clauses across states. There's only 11 states that actually have some explicit policy on this. And the language is something on the line on a pharmacist may decline to fill or refill a prescription due to religious, moral, or ethical grounds. Only 6 of the states also have some requirements for a pharmacy to make accommodations so that the patient still gets access to medication. All the other 5 do not prescribe any of this. A few states, 3, have explicit abortion and emergency contraception language in their clause. And it's also worth noting that none of the other states have any language about this. And so it's a gray area of, well, there's no language allowing a refusal, but there's also no language preventing a pharmacy from refusing a prescription. And so that's another gray area in what the law is. And so my team has been working on 3 research questions, broadly understood. The first is, which pharmacies are likely to refuse to fill a prescription, and which prescriptions are facing this issue? And again, there is some anecdotal evidence, as the articles I showed before, but we're trying to understand this in a rigorous manner. Second question, which is what I'm probably going to be focused on today. I have some words on other things too, but it is close to my mathematical work. And so if some pharmacy refuses to fulfill a prescription, what is the risk for that person? What is the impact on access of that person to a pharmacy to be able to, are there other pharmacies close enough so the person can seek and receive care elsewhere? And finally, sort of intersecting maybe the first 2 questions is, well, what are the demographics of people that are actually affected by a potential pharmacy desert, like a hole in the coverage that is formed where when refusal happens? And can we find some patterns? Can we observe anything about that? And so few words about the first question, which is we don't really know. The first question is yes, if you look at anecdotal evidence from articles and things that made the news, things that seem to show up are things related to gender and or sex-related care. Birth control, morning after pill, IVF medication, HRT. But there's not enough data to actually say anything rigorous about this. There is no requirement for pharmacies to record whether or not there's not reporting of when someone decides to refuse a prescription. There's a different channel that requires reporting, which is if someone suspects that a drug is going to be used that a prescription is used for drug abuse reasons. That's a different kind of legal channel for pharmacists to refuse to fill a prescription, and that requires reporting, but this does not. So this is sort of it happens, no one knows about it unless it makes the news or someone posts on social media. And so we have a part of the team that's working on trying to make sense of this, and I'll return a little bit to this at the end. Second question is, if a nearby pharmacist is likely to refuse to fill a prescription, then what is the impact, sort of geographically understood, of this, of something like this happening? And here's some math. If you came to the Public Policy Talk conference for a public policy talk, sorry about that. JK, this is just a slide or a few, but it's just a brief glimpse of the kind of math we're doing, which is sort of, we use tools from something called topological data analysis, which is a set of statistical tools that are equipped to understanding the spatial basis of this problem, because we're trying to, again, to understand the geographical impact in a city or a zip code of a pharmacy and what holes those creates of coverage. And the model analysis in a paper that studies voting locations by Hiko et al. I've got references at the end, and if you want to ask me more, very happy to talk about it. I think I'm fleshing some math terminology that we don't really need to worry too much about it, but I can tell you what each of those things means if you have questions at the end. So here's an example, toy example. There's only 4 pharmacies in Lewisburg, but this is Lewisburg. I've marked here the 4 pharmacies, and so using data from the National Provider Identifier Register, Google API, OpenStreetMaps, which is an open source database of streets and maps, we find the location of pharmacies. And ideally, we want to understand what are the areas served by each pharmacy, and therefore what gaps in coverage there may be. The issue with this is this is very, very complicated. You need a lot of data to understand, like, each pharmacy, needing to understand the coverage in each direction. And so there's a lot of data that goes into that. And it's also computationally expensive to build a model like this because you need to keep track of like every possible direction. And there's only 4 pharmacies in Lewisburg. But like if you look at a town just a little bit bigger, it can go to the like tens, if not 100 or more. But we want to build tools that can be made available to organizations and to the general public. So we want something that is easy and more economical to do. And so as a proxy to understanding the full coverage of each pharmacy, we define a distance between pharmacies. So you look at 2 pairs of pharmacies and you try to see how far they are from each other in terms of travel time, drive, transit, walk, well, not transit in Lewisburg, but, and the waiting times at each pharmacy, depending on how busy they are. And use this to approximate the areas of coverage. So for example, say that we, again, toy example here, but we fix a travel time of 5 minutes by car. Then you can reach those 3 pharmacies, like one can reach the other by driving 5 minutes, but maybe downtown Lewisburg there's traffic because it's busy, or there's a bunch of trucks and cows moving through, which happens. And so if someone were to go to the downtown Lewisburg pharmacy and experience a refusal, then they would not have access to another pharmacy that's close enough for them to go and seek care. And so they would be in a pharmacy desert. Now, this is like a toy example for pharmacy, tiny town we're in. But you can do this. We have a process to automate this and build the same sort of like analysis on like a larger scale. And the way to quantitatively make sense of it is through a persistent diagram. So this is some, and I'll explain what that means in a minute, less than that. Some preliminary results on Austin, Texas, using driving times. And so you have something like this, and like, oh, that's an ugly math graph. But the red dots measure so like the numbers of groups of pharmacies that are fully like detached from each other in terms of coverage. And we think about this instead of like fixing a time, but we look at like different travel distances and using that as a way to understand meaningful gaps. If a gaps persist, even if I allow longer travel times, then maybe it's a meaningful gap in the data. Rather than trying to understand people only want to travel 30 minutes, because that's hard, another hard question to address. And the other like dots on the other side mean inner gaps in overlapping coverage areas. So like think of like a donut hole. Like you have coverage around, but maybe there's a hole in the middle. And how far these dots are from the dotted line mean that there are more meaningful holes that persist even if you allow for a longer travel time. And so those may be important features of the actual landscape of pharmacies and access. So you see there are maybe the most important feature of this data set is that there are several groups of areas of coverage that are fully detached, even if you allow for very long travel times that are very far from the dotted line. And there are like not huge gaps, but some gaps within the areas. And so this is an example of how we build this data, and we can like have a look at the graph and then also make this more quantitative if we wanted to. So the last question, and this is the most in progress work that we have, is that we want to understand which populations are affected by these gaps. So we have a way to understand gaps in coverage and like a theoretical framework to do that, but we also want to couple that with demographic data, like what this neighborhood is very affected by a potential pharmacy desert. What kind of people live there? Can we infer that there's other patterns and something like that? So wanting to link the demographic data from like census with the topological data analysis. And I'll leave you with like some takeaways, and you can ask me more questions at the end if you want, or catch me around between today and tomorrow. But pharmacy refusals are something that happens, and we have some preliminary evidence that suggests that they may affect people minorized around gender, sex, or sexuality lines. We have developed some tools to understand the geographical impact of a refusal. But one big issue to anything else with this is a lack of data. There is no actual data on refusals happening. We know they exist because they make the news and people post them on social media, but we don't know anything about, we would like to know what kind of medications are affected, where does the thing happens, what are areas that are more or less risky for refusal. We don't know that, and a part of the team put together a survey to try to collect this data. So I can also circulate this flyer later, but there's a survey for people to self-report cases in which a prescription has been denied, so we can actually build the data to make more out of our analysis. That's it.
Another one with perfect timing. And save questions for the end. We'll do them all grouped together. It'll be more exciting that way, you know? Okay, Valerie is up next.
I'm going to guess that you can't really see me from behind here. So I will move a bit over to the side, though I know that's not the best solution either. But I first want to say the brains behind this paper is Dr. Paula Cole, and she is with the economics department at the University of Denver in Colorado, obviously. And I help write and hang on to her coattails. I am a professor of economics at King's College, which is in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. It is about an hour and a half drive from here. So to introduce this paper that is analyzing the joy of motherhood as an enabling myth of neoliberalism and patriarchy, we'll start first with and Mary Wren is also a good grad school friend of mine. She says that enabling myths support neoliberalism by convincing people of false freedoms and choices. I have a little short quote on my office door. I should have looked at the author of the quote, but I love the quote that basically boils down to, if you're going to have choices, you need to be able to participate in the creation of those choices. And so I'm going to reference Mary Wren again, who said you can have the choice whether to get your eye poked with a pencil, and actually that's not even the choice, right? You're going to get your eye poked with a pencil. Your choice is whether you get poked with the sharp end or the eraser end. And so false freedom, false choices. So Dr. Wren examines 3 core enabling myths of neoliberalism. And the first is business can do whatever government does better. They can do it more efficiently. They can do it more cheaply. Government regulations pose undue burdens on business, ensuring what good business practice and competitive markets would have been able to do on their own without government interference. And given the choice, people will prefer to live off welfare rather than work because no one wants to work. Never mind the fact that the TANF welfare program in the United States requires you to work in order to receive benefits. So Paula and I look to expand this analysis by evaluating the enabling myth of the joy of motherhood. And this myth convinces women to do the care work of motherhood just because there is so much that you get from being a mom, and that labor of love is priceless. I will say I am the mother of 2 children, and yet I say that with tongue in cheek. I love my children, but there were days, I did not feel the joy of motherhood. So this myth involves the patriarchy and neoliberalism as they work to ensure that women will continue to be the caregivers, and they will have the responsibility of raising our children to be future workers. So a quick definition of mothering defined by 4C is a socially constructed set of activities and relationships that's involved in nurturing, in caring for people. There are alternative definitions as well. I'll just highlight others believe mothering and motherhood may be viewed as natural, universal, and unchanging. There are 5 prominent beliefs that were developed by Hummer that women feel encouraging them to be mothers. And Hummer does the research and finds that 2 of the prominent beliefs are really myths. Only motherhood leads to fulfillment, and motherhood ensures future security. The idea that it would ensure future security is that as you get older, you have your children take care of you. And one woman pointed out that she had worked in a nursing home and noticed how few children would come visit their parents in the nursing home. So both of those ultimately are believed to be myths by and large by women. The mystiques include, while women have a natural maternal drive, women are nurturers, and women experience maternal joy. And so just to give you a little bit more information about those, the natural maternal drive means that women are wired to want to be mothers. The childless mothers interviewed in Hummer's research mostly subscribed to this idea, although some denied personally having a maternal drive. The second mystique, the naturals at being nurturers, despite their non-mother statuses, interviewees adhered to the belief that women are natural nurturers to a large extent. And then with maternal joy, this emotional experience is only knowable when you become a parent, casting motherhood as deeply fulfilling yet mysterious to those who remain childless. And so at the time we were writing this paper, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, she's Arkansas, correct? Yes. It was that or Missouri. Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders reinforced this last mystique by proclaiming former Vice President Harris as less humble than Sanders because she did not have biological children, as did Sanders. So being a childless woman remains socially devalued and carries with it a negative stigma that women must manage. Yet there are major costs to motherhood, causing some women to choose not to have children even when they would like to be a mother. And so the costs of motherhood. First, there's a motherhood penalty. Historically, mothers and fathers, however, worked together to raise their children. But you see here research published in 2019 analyzes the motherhood penalty in the United States from 1986 to 2014. For mothers of one child, after controlling for education and experience, data shows the motherhood penalty actually increasing from 8% to 14%, yet mothers improved their education and their experience over that time. During the same period, for mothers of multiple children, the wage gap actually held steady for mothers of 2 children, but it increased for mothers of 3 or more children. There are also economic risks of being a housewife. So if you are familiar with Barbara Bergman's work, she talked about the real risks of being a housewife. And in 2022, the home injury death rate was 38.6 per 100,000 population. Compare that to the workplace death rate of just 3.2 per 100,000. You have domestic violence, that is 490 episodes or events per 100,000. And these events would include rape or sexual assault, robbery, aggravated assault, and simple assault. And then there's the fact that you could be facing a divorce and maybe you've spent, say, the last 15, 20 years raising children, taking care of a family with no work experience, and your husband decides he wants a divorce. Now you are essentially told, go get a job and take care of yourself. So that's a real risk. I know I don't have the time to talk about TANF reforms. Of course, I shouldn't say of course, but you may or may not know the cost of childcare is significant. So because of the cost of childcare, there was this 34 percentage point increase in the percentage of mothers under 30 not planning to have another child. That was in comparison to 2019. And 66% of mothers, for example, considered leaving the workforce in 2024. That was due to stress and cost of childcare. That was a 14% increase. Anecdotally, I know there was a husband and wife professor couple at King's who purposefully spaced their 2 children, so only 1 child would be in childcare at a time because they could not afford 2 children to be in childcare at the same time. Postpartum depression is also a potential cost, but I want to talk about the fact that women are making different choices. And so you see a declining in the US birth rate, which depending on who you talk to is a problem. I'll just leave it at that. I'm thinking of it's not being talked about right now, but I'm thinking of the $10,000 that a family would receive for every baby that they would have, and there would possibly be a mother award if you had more than 6 or 8 children, something like that. So we've seen a decline in the gender wage gap since the 1970s. We did have, though that may be changing, control over reproductive freedom, increased political power, business power, control over our financial well-being. Makes it more costly to have a child because of the opportunity cost. Excuse me. But there's been some pushback. If you're familiar with incels, which before this research I was not actually all that familiar, but incels is short for involuntary celibates, is a community solidified in its hatred towards women, and their anger is fueled by their unattractiveness to the women they desire. This rejection serves as fuel for misogyny. Then you have the Dobbs decision, which says abortion is now not protected. And so abortion is now legal in 13 states, and 28 states have abortion bans on gestational duration. And you see discussion of a national abortion ban, restrictions on IVF, and limitations possibly on birth control. So motherhood, for all of its benefits, does not ensure economic stability for women. It actually makes it more likely she will face financial hardships. Moms are disproportionately bearing the cost of children, and Nancy Fulbraid says society, especially men, are free riding off moms. You see Duggar noting that enabling myths work through double standards, blind spots, stereotypes, and so forth. And so for our particular discussion, a double standard that I don't have time to get into would be those women who are on welfare and purposefully having children so they could get greater welfare payments. I do not believe that, but right, that's a story that's routinely told. emulation. For example, we've got Pinterest moms, and I imagine I've got 1 minute left. So essentially, women must choose between two poor choices: motherhood and the cost of that care work, or individual autonomy and distancing oneself from an ethic of care. This is not agency. True agency for women would mean that it would be a non-issue if she decided to have children or not, as this decision would not impact her economic well-being. And going back to Mary Wren, she argues enabling myths reinforce a central premise that the locus of control really is the individual. And she and Bill Waller convey that neoliberalism as an ideology valorizes autonomy as a state of being and as an ethics of self-interest and personal responsibility exclusively. It crowds out an ethic of care. And so Paula and I conclude that women not choosing motherhood reflects individual autonomy playing out and an ethic of care being pushed out. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Derek, another new faculty. Welcome to Bucknell.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Especially, it's great to see so many students here. Sorry, you're probably going to have to hear it again tomorrow, but it's because some of y'all are asking for it. Anyways, here I have a paper that actually started almost a year ago. Tyler Rennie is a scholar who I really, really respect. And he called me after the election and said, hey, like, I think the economy is shaping Latino voters and their voter behavior. I know you wrote a paper on this. Let's co-author. So this is the outcome of that. Just for some context, and a lot of this will be, and again, I tried to make this presentation sort of summarized, and we'll get to the other parts. Latino voters are becoming more important, both in size and influence. And traditionally, Democrats have appealed to this group on immigration policy and also generally working class issue priorities. Republicans have increasingly, and ever since Donald Trump's presidency, used rhetoric demeaning immigrants and racial minorities. But Republicans are still appealing to Latino groups, historically Cubans, but also on the issues of social conservatism, abortion, entrepreneurialism. But the conventional wisdom, especially before Trump, is that Latino voters are going to shift against Republicans identified more as Democrats because of immigration. However, in 2016 and really ever since, this is not manifested. Instead, what we have seen is a pretty consistent trend of 65% Democrat vote choice, 30% Republican among Latino voters. 2024, all I'm seeing is that might be a little bit higher for Republicans, but not hugely different. It's also relevant to note that Latinos are less likely than Black or white voters to have partisan identities, to identify as strong partisans. They're more likely to identify as independent. And also, on average, Latinos are less likely to be contacted by campaigns, to be on voter rolls, to appear as people on different voter registration organizational websites, just for a number of reasons that leads to Latinos getting less information from campaigns even over the course of an election. So here's a paper of mine that was published recently. So just to note, this is showing identification with Democrat, Republican, or independent. Democrat includes independents who lean Democrat, same for Republicans. So that green line is only independents who identify with neither party. We then have 35 different surveys, plotted it over this time period, and then plotted a line through it. What we find, so there is an expected pro-Obama bump in this 2008-2012 period, drop in Republican. But after 2016, we are not seeing any backlash to Donald Trump. If anything, there is a slight increase in Republican identification among Latino voters overall, slight increase in independent, and decrease in Democratic identification. When we break this down by subgroup, things actually get even more surprising. So Latino immigrants, those who were born either in outside the US or on the island of Puerto Rico, are then those who moved towards Obama in 08 and 12, but then moved towards Trump post-2016. US-born Latinos, on the other hand, are increasingly going towards the independent party, not the actual independent party. They are going away from both. And if you want to read more about this again, that paper is currently out. Happy to chat about that. But just as a baseline, We are interested in what factors explain Latino partisanship and Latino voting behavior in this modern partisan era, which I would say is post-Trump. And what explains this? Oh, yeah, no. Oh, no, sorry. I mean, like, I should say post-2016. Post-2016. That is factually correct. And more or less, what explains this? Again, when Trump is happening, we are not seeing Latinos going against Republicans. That, from our research, is not what we found. And this is at a time when Republicans did not listen to the 2012 biopsy. They are not moderating on immigration. They are going full speed ahead. But more importantly, and this is, if you know, this is how I talk about this work a lot, is that we know much more about Latino Democrats and Republicans, but what is happening with Latino independents? My argument is that they are more likely to shift because of economic circumstances. And so just as like an overall review, a lot of research is on how Latino voters care deeply about immigration, pro-undocumented solidarity. These remain important. This work also has not found that abortion or Catholicism or this cross pressure, and this is neither here nor there. I have other work looking at this. Just to note that this is not actually the cross pressure for Latino Democrats as expected. On the other side of the partisan aisle, Latino Republicans are anti-socialist, racially conservative, anti-Black Lives Matter, pro-law and order, anti-undocumented, more likely to be religious, evangelical Protestant, more likely to be male. And again, this is a sizable minority, but still a consistent minority of Latino voters. And again, what is happening with Latino independence? There is very little research on this group, and is the emphasis of a lot of my work. So my argument is that it's the economy. How do you reach Latino independence? Economic topics. So broadly speaking, I think of this in terms of rhetoric on jobs, taxes, healthcare, inflation. And work on this shows that Latinos get less information from these ads from campaigns. In fact, Republicans are more likely to talk about the economy in areas with Latinos compared to Democrats who emphasize immigration. And so overall, I argue that there is unexplored persuasive potential for this topic among Latino independents particularly. Okay, so this is my other recent publication earlier this year. Two hypotheses, and I'll just simplify it. H1, Latino Democrats and Republicans will be Democrats and Republicans, full stop. H2, Latino independents will support either party if they talk about economic topics compared to non-policy, immigration, or abortion topics. All right, I'm gonna move quickly beyond this, but just to say, this is one of my studies with a Democratic candidate talking about economic topics. Again, I'll be moving quickly, so you don't have to read this all. I designed my experiments to be as closely to like how people in the real world consume political information. I looked at a lot of these in the real world. And I designed it with 4 different treatment arms. So one in every 4 persons exposed to a non-policy control, to a pro-undocumented message, that progressive economic message you saw before, or to a race-class message inspired by Ian Haney Lopez. And on the left-hand side, I show results among Democratic Latino voters. On the right-hand side, among independent Latino voters. And put simply, Latino Democrats support the Democratic candidate. They are just as likely to say on this 4 out of 5 scale, they are likely to want to vote for Fisher. For Latino independents, on the other hand, there is a drop-off where under both the nonpartisan or the non-policy control and pro-undocumented condition, the Latino independents do not like this message as much as talking about the economy. And so our next paper, which is the one that I am generally presenting on, I'm trying to get to that pretty quickly. We are out understanding how Latino macro-partisanship, put simply the ratio of Latinos who are Democrat, Independent, and Republican, is shaped by economic evaluations. My co-authors have various publications on this also, and so we're trying to essentially triangulate all of our different data sets and ways of approaching this. A lot of method stuff that if you're a method person in the room, please chat to me about data. I'm primarily familiar with these like middle end data sets, but I also want to work eventually with like massive N like L2 and Catalyst. I'm also currently not showing analyses with state level objective data, but long term, especially if there's even like geocoded data, I have data, panel data from 2019 to 2021, N of 150,000. That includes a Latino oversample. So like during COVID, I can see when stuff is shifting. I just need to figure out that data and get, especially the econometric geodata. Okay, so today, really quick, showing presidential years, validated turnout, and just overall, what we're showing is changes in party ID, which is, again, this 3-point scale, and then vote for an incumbent or not for an incumbent. Okay, so I'm gonna walk you through this, and this will become easier once I go through this. So Firstly, this outcome variable is just the probability of identifying as either a Democrat on the top or Republican on the bottom. And then this bottom variable is whether you believe the economy is doing poorly, somewhat poorly, neutrally, positively, very positively. And then the different lines, blue lines show among Black respondents, green among Latino, red among white respondents. And so just to interpret it, firstly, and to be clear, one of my frameworks is that a lot of these are endogenous, which is just simply saying people become Democrats because they think the economy is doing well, or they think the economy is doing well because they're Democrats. So I'm not saying there's like a cause here. But people who think the economy is doing well under Democratic presidents, regardless of race, are more likely to identify as Democrat. For white people, there is a sharper drop-off here. If they think the economy is doing poorly, they're less likely to identify as Democrat. And just, again, I'm limited on time. Just a takeaway here is that there is interesting symmetry in large part where Latino voters, more or less, are kind of in between Black and Latino voters in terms of their macro partisanship and reaction to the economy. This changes when we look at independent identification. And so here, only under Democratic presidents, Latino voters who believe the economy is doing poorly are more likely to identify as independent. And this is a marginally significant effect above and beyond for whites. The same relationship is not true under Republican presidents. So again, simply put, Latino and also Black voters punish Democratic presidents when they think the economy is doing poorly, and they don't punish Republicans in the same way. This does translate to vote choice. So I'll just say ignore these too much. Partisans will be partisan. Look at the middle. So especially here, when we're considering voters who are voting the incumbent out, if they are mad about the economy, these are quote unquote retrospective voters. Latino voters, especially Latino independents, behave like white independents. They're saying if the economy is doing bad, vote them out. And again, so party ID, I think, is a bit more complicated when it comes to vote choice. Latino independents behave like white independents and are anti-incumbent, by and large. And then this is just the final. Again, I'm trying to get better objective measures. This stood out to me that Latinos from higher income categories in Democratic presidencies who are independent are less likely to vote Democrat. So this means, but that line is flat under Republican presidencies, which simply means that, and the way I think about this is that Trump is probably upsetting a lot of folks over here, potentially over here. Yeah, got to test it. And making income no longer as predictive. But whenever we're talking about under Democratic presidencies, it is a predictor in the negative sense that higher income Latino independents turn away from voting for the Democrat. All right, so just in conclusion, we find suggestive evidence, and again, happy to talk after or in email, that Democrats lose more from poor economic perceptions among Latino and Black voters, not really among Latino Democrats or Democrats overall or Republicans overall. So again, I feel pretty confident in that H1. I think partisans will be partisans. But for independents, I'm finding this asymmetry. Democrats are punished more than Republican presidents. But there's continuing questions about income and education, which in this case I use as controls, but they could be explanatory variables. And just overall, testing this question of how economic retrospection manifests for Latino voters. My next immediate step is to refine these analyses from the CES, add more data, and then replicate across all these other voter data sets. And I will be meeting with campaigns during 26 and 2028 as part of a larger book project trying to figure this out. Okay, thank you very much.